we're coming across a quasi, I would say, misunderstanding between shippers and service providers when it comes to wrapping up on capacity. And how do you prepare when you have a shipper asking you to provide 5 units per week on a specific lane and moving from 5 to 20 to 25 to 30 units?
This is the Art of Freight podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Art of Freight by Trans.eu, the podcast that showcases the freight forwarding industry's remarkable ability to problem solve and innovate. I'm your host, Gregor Gowans, and today I'm joined by Alain Jestin, the CEO, co-founder and director of Efret. Alain has been in the industry for well over a quarter of a decade, the vast majority of which has been spent in his current role. During this time, the company has expanded its operations to 27 European countries and North Africa, and since 2021 has been part of the Uniserv Group. So Alain, welcome to the Art of Freight podcast. It's great to have you on the show. Let's start, if I may, by touching on this anniversary you've got coming up. You're due to be 20 years as CEO and co-founder of Efret. What were the circumstances like when you started the business? Why did you start Efret? And how do you feel about it looking back now?
Well, first of all, hi, Craig. Thanks for having me on your show. It's a great opportunity. Always nice to catch up twice a year. So yes, 20 years for Efret, when in fact, I don't believe it's been already 20 years because it's gone really, really, really quickly. And we started like a West Coast startup in California. 3 of us in a small office with laptops. And the primary drive of incorporating Efret was to get back to customers' expectation and what was it they were after. The second drive was how can we bring our, at the time, quite obsolescent way of working in the transport industry, where we will still have a lot of paperwork, a lot of administrative and very, very heavy tasks on our hands. So how can we automate a lot of what we do? And that was the second drive. And to achieve that, in fact, we always thought that an hybrid solution, or what we call an asset-light company, would be the solution. So a heavy focus on automation, on softwares, and how can we inspire ourselves for what was happening on the other side of the Atlantic. There was the late 90s, early noughties. eBay was coming on. Google was coming on. All these tech companies were starting to flourish, and we were starting to, oh my God, what's the internet? Okay, how can I use it better? And that was the drive. And there's also a fourth element, which is as predominant as the first 3 ones, the human nature, the operator, the person who's also managing the freight behind the laptop, and the driver on the other end are very, very important. So these are the 4 elements which for us are key in our industry. Still today, it's very, very important. I feel that today we lose sight of that. I might be jumping ahead of the next topics we will be discussing during our conversation, but I can see that we are moving into some kind of a Uberization of the transport industry. And we've seen what has happened with the taxis. This is happening with the trucks. And we must not forget that a vehicle has a human being behind it. And it's our duty to embrace technology, but at the same time, we need to be very, very cautious.
We'll have plenty of time to discuss that later on in the show. But as I said, it would be interesting to think about some of the problems that the industry was experiencing back when you started and maybe compare them to today, because there could be issues that you were grappling with 20 years ago that you and your competitors are still grappling with now. Whereas there might also be completely different problems that you were experiencing back then that you don't have now because of advances in technology and so forth.
You're right. Well, 20 years ago, the way of communicating was still very broken in different sources of support. You had the fax, you had the phone, you had the emails, you had very, very little technology available. Not many companies had tracking on their vehicle. So it was the old-fashioned way of tracking your shipment through many, many phone calls with the dispatcher. If you were lucky, a driver would have a mobile phone with it. So essentially, over the last 20 years, there's been a massive, massive boosting technology, which is very, very beneficial, increasing the automation of very, very time-consuming tasks 20 years ago, which are less so today. So we've seen that changing a lot, that's for sure. And then over the years, we've seen the increased importance of freight platform in any shape or form you want to play with them. It can be freight exchange, it can be freight management operation that shippers will choose. This is also has brought a lot of improved efficiencies in our jobs. That's for sure.
What about some of the challenges that you might have with regards to capacity? I mean, there are always discussions about this because the market changes so much.
Yeah, well, preparing this call over the last few days, I was looking at a very simple thing. I was looking at a chain of events between 2004, 2005 up to today. And when you look at it, there were major, major events every 2 or 3 years. Okay, we started in 2005. 2008, there was the first global financial crisis. We thought we were at the end of it in 2009, and then there was a second one in 2010. 2016, you've got the Brits deciding that the European Union is no good for them, and they vote for Brexit. And then you got a certain length of uncertainty because it took 4 years to negotiate the exit of the United Kingdom from European Union. And when this is finalized, what do we get? We get a pandemic in 2020. So during that pandemic, and I think we had 2 lockdowns, I think, over the period of 18 months, and during which you got in 2021, the rollout of Brexit has been very, very difficult, in fact. And we're still seeing today, 4 years on, that the simple process of safety and security declaration is not yet implemented, and it should be implemented at the end of January 2025. So postponing it 6 times. So it's not an easy one. Today, we have crises on our doorsteps in Europe, with unfortunately the Ukraine war. And we also had crises in the supply chain with the Suez Canal. So that's the geopolitical steps, then a bit of financial issues on top of it. And you also have, which is a major, major concern, which is climate change, which is at the forefront of everybody's concern when it comes now to transport purchasing. Sustainability, climate change is a very, very big driver in making also a decision on who you're going to work with. So yes, 20 years with quite a number of challenges that we had to navigate it through, and we're still here.
Well, let's see if we can break some of these down, because obviously we don't want to just talk about the problems, but also some of the solutions. It's interesting to look at how you managed to navigate some of these. So we think about Brexit. I mean, that was a challenge in that there were, different regulations that you needed to take account of. There were customs challenges, processing of paperwork and so forth. Now, also the driver market changed as a result of Brexit as well, because there was a driver pool that was not available to the UK market.
Yeah.
And then if you look at some of the other issues, they're more about routes being blocked. Think about rail freight, going through China with the situation, Russia, Ukraine, movement to the middle corridor, and then the Suez Canal. And then the environmental thing is a different one as well, because then you require investment in new vehicles and so forth. So if we think about Brexit to begin with, now, how did you go about trying to get around some of the difficulties that were presented by Brexit?
Over the, basically from the time the referendum place in June 2016 and the implementation of Brexit on the early 2021, our posture from day one was, well, that's it. It's acted, it's voted. Whether we like it or not, it's another debate, but it is on. So our posture was to make sure we would be ready for Brexit, which we were. So we decided to create our own custom department. So we are fully custom ready here at Efret, custom clearance in and out of the UK to all major 27 destinations in Europe. So we are effectively up and running with that. We're still finding that some shippers are not totally familiar with the process, but we are here to help them and to guide them. So on that front, it was more a question of gearing ourselves up to this new challenge. Effectively, it was, I won't say hard. It was just a question of learning or relearning an existing process, which is customs. So yes, it's adding complication, it's adding workload in what used to be a free process, a literally free flow process. But we got around it.
One thing that's quite interesting is the attitude of some of the different companies towards what was going on, because there was a lot of uncertainty. And I think there were a lot of companies in the industry, and you can totally understand the perspective, that were keen through some of the industry groups to lobby against certain things, or lobby, let's say, for agreements that would make the process of moving freight between the European Union and UK easier. But there's an argument that I've seen with some in the industry that because some companies adopted that mentality, they weren't necessarily ready to implement some of the custom solutions when the changes eventually did come. And those who, let's say, adopted a sort of worst case scenario mentality from the start were in fact ready. And anything less than that worst case scenario basically would be a positive, because you're ready.
Yeah, you're totally right. There were two camps still at that time. We decided to go with the worst case scenario, which with hindsight was the right decision. And even being prepared, we also had to jump through hoops on the first 2 weeks of January 2021 when it was implemented. But we were much better prepared than others on the market. But if you fast forward 4 years now, nearly since Brexit, it was quite interesting to hear the politics here in the UK saying that in a way uncertain front, and we will not delve into that, but also from Brexit was not delivered, and they completely made a hash out of it.
So let's move on to some of those geopolitical challenges and some of the difficulties that have arisen in the last few years that have made routes unavailable or have changed the driver market. As you mentioned, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and more recently we've had the situation in the Middle East and with the Suez Canal not just being blocked for a few months, as was the case a few years ago, but more or less indefinitely until the situation changes. So how have you managed to negotiate some of these challenges?
So on the Ukrainian front and the recess of a large quantity of Ukrainian drivers, it did affect us, like many operators, European operators. And we basically changed the way we were operating. We switched some of the routes which were undertaken by road. We switched them to intermodal where it was possible. It was not always the case for us because we're a JIT specialist. Everything we do, whether it's in the e-commerce industry, the automotive industry, or the packaging and FMCG industry, we are very, very tight schedule. So it doesn't fit into intermodal options. But when it is working, we're doing it. So freeing up capacity, but we can really focus on our core activity. So that was one of the main things we looked at. We also looked at with our customers at short sea solution, because there are quite a few players on the market. Something I did not mention, Greg, earlier on, is Efret was independent from 2005 all the way through to 2021. And in 2021, we signed a joint venture with the largest independent logistic company in the UK called Uniserve. So it's a 50-50 joint venture. And we've done that because, in fact, it was the right time to do it. And because there was these crises looming, and basically we needed to have options outside traditional road transport. And by joining the Uniserve group, we had direct access to short sea shipping solution, intermodal solution. And also today, Efret, we can offer Efret to all our customers. So it was just a question is how the world around us is evolving. How can Efret still be a major player for customers who have chosen to work with us? How can we rebound and make sure that all these geopolitical issues would not affect the way we are working with our customers? And that's what we've done.
Yeah, I mentioned that there is also some challenges with regards to intermodal as well at the moment, certainly with the situation in Germany where there's a lot of infrastructure work going on. I understand that there's a little bit of rerouting and that's having a slight impact on capacity. So I imagine it's useful to have intermodal there as a mechanism, but there may have even been a slight modal switch back to road as a response to that.
I'm very aware of what you're mentioning about, all these infrastructure work in Germany, which is affecting some of our customers, not because it's run by Efret, but because we know it, because we are running these services with other companies, and we were approached to provide alternative solution by road until, the intermodal or the rail is fixed on such corridors. So yeah, we are very much aware of that. There's a lot of work to be done on the intermodal network because there's a very, very high demand. The demand, in fact, is much higher than what the whole network can offer. It will be a long process to make sure that we can switch a significant volume all around Europe from road to rail. So I'm bouncing back on these short sea services. We are today able to offer short sea services from the northeast of Europe all the way down to the Iberian corridor with our own asset, on ship, on containers through the group. We can do that. And we are currently working on projects with our customers to switch what would be traditionally a very long road transit, I would say from northwest of Spain to northeast of Poland. Today, we can offer a short sea service, which will take away a lot of volumes from the road onto one single ship and free up capacity again on the road to focus on more pressing transit.
Let's turn to a more immediate problem. If you look at the UK market, there are a lot of quite troubling headlines about some trucking companies who've been around for a long time entering administration. And when you see that so often, you can imagine that there is a loss of capacity to the market. And of course, during peak times, that's when you look to tap into that capacity. You're also looking to tap into not just any capacity, but from carriers that you can trust, that meet certain standards. So how much of a challenge is that? And what are you doing to try and get access to the kind of capacity that you'd be looking for?
It is a very interesting topic, this one, Craig. I think this one is really worth developing because we're coming across I would say, misunderstanding between shippers and service providers when it comes to wrapping up on capacity. First of all, I want to express that it's very, very sad to see all these British or English companies who've been around for 40, 50, 60 years and literally disappearing overnight. So that's very, very sad. That's a lot of expertise that is lost. That's very, very important. And yes, when it comes to peak, well, yeah, you need to be surrounded by partners who know what they're doing. And there's also this element of how do you prepare for peak from one year to another? You need very reliable forecast. You need very, very reliable executed forecast. It's not only having a forecast, but making sure that this forecast becomes reality. And how do you prepare when you have a shipper asking you to provide 5 units per week on a specific lane and moving from 5 to 20 to 25 to 30 units? That's where you need, yes, to surround yourself and basically be supported by this partner. Yes, with the current situation, it's providing a bit more difficult, but we still manage it because we've offered alternative solution. We came with, a few years ago, the e-commerce industry, we came with a different approach. We are operating with the RT vehicles, but we are also operating with smaller fleet, with the 7.5 tonners and the light vans. And this has proven a very good success when it comes to peak driving bans or special promotional program over the summer, because these lighter van and these 7.5 tonners are allowed to work on Saturdays and Sundays when you have driving restriction. So basically, we've managed to create, in a way, new capacity which would have not been available otherwise if we were still focusing on RT vehicles. So that was one of the tricks we came with, which is totally legal to run on specific period of a year, whether it's summer holidays, summer bans, or weekend bans when we come to the festivities.
It's interesting you touch on that because I do recall that there was a bit of discussion about making it a little bit easier for potential drivers with regards to licensing to be able to drive some of these trucks, and that could potentially bring in an additional driver pool from which you can utilize. And also at the same time, the 7.5 ton trucks tend to suit electrification a little bit better. I think you might get the mileage out of them. They can be used a lot in urban distribution. So then you can utilize them in certain environments as well.
Correct. You're right. When we're talking about the last mile delivery outside, the smaller van or the sprinter vans, these ones are, I would say, the one where you can gain, on the electrification of your last mile. Coming to the middle mile, where we are the most active as Efret, it's still a bit difficult. But you're right, these vehicles are lighter anyway. So in terms of CO2 emission, the smaller engines, they are lighter than the traditional RT vehicle. It's also a gain. You are effectively more environmental friendly by operating this vehicle on these roads. It's this specific product, what we call eFast at Efret, is a real benefit and a game changer for both our customers and ourselves, because it's been really, really innovative. And it has also strengthened the relationship with our customers who decided to buy into that product, because we went onto special project like right sizing project where lanes were looked at, volumes were looked at, and where can we transfer volumes which were originally moved with RT vehicles. Does it make sense to transfer this volume on smaller vehicle? And it did, because it transpired that the Arctic vehicle were used, but never full. The trailer was never full. So it makes sense. Everybody was a winner on this one.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because obviously there's the counter argument that if you do have a full 40-ton truck, that would be, let's say, better for the environment. But as you say, that you're not quite able to fill them.
No, there was a proper exercise of looking at all the shipments moved on a given period, and it was proven that it was the right decision.
Let's touch on something else, which I think is quite a pressing topic at the moment, and that is security. Now, cargo theft and the threats that arise from that have been around forever, basically. But I think because of the economic situation at the moment, and let's say also some challenges that we've got, particularly in the UK, with access to facilities, and particularly secure facilities where you have enough protection in the shape of fencing or CCTV and these kind of things. It can be very difficult when it comes to route planning. So based on these threats, have you had to go to the next level in terms of how you plan your routes and where your trucks stop?
Because of some of the products moving over the years, we've acquired quite a lot of experience on the do's and the don'ts. Bar a few exceptions in the UK, we take the mantle that there are no such secured truck park, like the ones you can have in continental Europe. So much so that when we plan a vehicle, we have two options, all right? Either the vehicle's got sufficient time to reach the delivery station and we do it in one shot, okay, legally, obviously, but we calculate that when we leave port or the train terminal, we make sure that we reach that destination. If we don't, and I'm coming back, with the joint venture with Uniserve, well, thanks to the geographical coverage of the Uniserve route in the UK, we will always have a depot where the driver can stop and make his rest in a very secure area. So that's one of the good things of joining a much larger group. We benefit from the network from the group in the UK, where we would be able to stop either in the greater London area or along the M1 or the M6 corridor. We will always have a place where we can route the driver and he can stop safely. So that's a very good thing for us.
Well, I would like to think that in the future that there might be some places where you would have the confidence to be able to stop, but you wouldn't necessarily have to do that. But we'll just have to wait and see what comes with some of the promises that have been made.
We have connections with authorities when it comes to freight theft. And more often than not, our experience is more opportunistic theft, where you would have basically gang, roaming up and down the motorways in the UK and just stopping on the area, just slashing through the curtain and looking into it and say, well, I've just stumbled across a full load of nappies, or I've just stumbled across a full load of tires. Shall we go for it or not? And on the very few occasions, touch wood, at Efret, very few occasions when we were unfortunately targeted by such theft is because we had a compulsory deviation, in our route planning. So basically the driver had a mechanical issue or he was falling sick and he couldn't do anything else but stop on the next stop. And That's when we got hit. But yeah, I would like to think that over the years, we would have more opportunity to have all secure truck park available in the UK. I know that very lately in Europe, European Union had decided to invest another 360 or 400 million euros. But what is 400 million? How many truck parking you build? 5, 6 at the most, I think, something like that. So it's still a drop in the ocean when it comes to that. As we're doing here with the group in the UK, and we're also doing it on the continent with our partners. And I think that's what the great majority of our peers are doing, is basically rely on a good network of like-minded carriers who are ready to open the gates to have a haulier and offering a safe space to park overnight. So I know we can rely on our partners to do that, and we'll do it gladly if they were asking us, when they're asking us to do it. But today, I think that's the good intelligence that is working. Our freight market, we mustn't forget, is one of the largest one in the world, with the largest economical area in the world. We have 500 million consumer in Europe. We still have a lot of small independent transport company operating. In fact, that's the backbone of our industry. Do these guys have access to such arrangement or agreement between maybe medium to larger groups? I don't think they have, and they would be the one who would be hit.
Let's move on, shall we, to talk about digitalization. We discussed this a little bit off air. If I look at your website, you seem to pride yourselves in using technology. We're seeing so many different digital tools that you can access, whether that be freight exchanges, visibility tools, and also a lot of freight automation when it comes to freight assignment, things like that. So how do you think that is going to evolve and change the market?
It's a very good question, because I did attend a few transport fairs this year, more than any other years. And what was really, really, really striking, Greg, is that the traditional carriers are no longer visible on these transports there. What you see on the transports there is all these telematics, all the digitization option being advertised. So there are a lot of players on the market, a lot of players, big ones, big names, but you also have medium companies offering digital solution. The question I have for the future of our industry is that these options, as good as they are, will never be able to replace the driver and the vehicle that is needed to move the shipment. So it's very good to have digitization of the option, but what do we do to make sure that we still have the means to move the cargo? And today, when we hear companies filing up insolvency, we still have quite push on our cost. The cost, of operating a vehicle has gone up quite substantially over the last 18 to 24 months. Volumes are not there. Economies are not growing in Europe. As I said in preamble, we've seen factoring agency intervening more and more with some players on the market. So it is question time, and more than ever, we need to support our industry. We need to support the hauliers, but I don't yet have a very made answer or a solution. These are really, really interesting times, that's for sure. Do you have an incline on that?
What I think from talking to you just there and listening to you is, yes, there is discussion about having autonomous vehicles. There have been some tests. Some of the big truck manufacturers have conducted tests, but there is a lot to be done. And even if some of them might be ready sooner than we think, they're probably only going to be able to access certain routes on the motorway and do certain miles of road. They're not going to be navigating the streets of Sevilla or something like that. So there is an aspect that is not digital that we still need to consider. And although digital tools can help us to predict certain things or help us to optimize our operations and use the capacity that we have at our disposal better, ultimately at the same time, you still need that driver pool and you still need the assets on the ground to be able to move the cargo.
Earlier this year, we did a piece together when we were discussing Morocco. This is a territory where Efret is making more and more inroads. That's where we are increasing our presence. And I was there this week, in fact, with our partners, discussing what would be the next step for 2025, 2026, how we want to be more present. And we discussed about the shortage of drivers in Europe. One inroad would be to basically ease up the utilization of Moroccan driver when they come to Europe with a shipment from Morocco, okay, because you have a substantial number of drivers doing the trip, crossing onto Spain and delivering the goods, whether it's here in the UK or Spain or France or Germany. The state of the agreement at the moment is a state-by-state agreement where the Moroccan driver will be allowed to reload in the countries delivering to go back to Morocco. Why don't we ease that up? Why don't we let a Moroccan driver or a Moroccan registered vehicle able, if he's ending up in Germany, reloading in Germany and maybe go to Spain, maybe go to southern France and do a couple of cross-border? That would release the pressure that we have in our European market. Because at the same time, we're all thinking about decarbonization, reducing our CO2 emission. That would also fit into that by reducing the number of empty kilometers these vehicles are currently doing, because they are not allowed, or they are allowed to move cargo, but have a very, very, very restricted agreement. Let's think about that.
That's more of a political question than anything else. But if we go back to your point on Morocco, that's interesting, because what you're pointing at there is potential, let's say, to have some relaxations in the form of cabotage, yes?
Yeah.
And I guess when you look at that and you try to think, or has there been any previous example? And I do recall that during the sort of crisis, the supply chain crisis, as it was labelled in the UK, towards the end of pandemic, I think it was around about this time of year where there was a bit of panic in the media about, oh, there's no chicken in KFC and there's no bread in the supermarket aisles and this kind of thing. And the government did decide to relax some of the rules on cabotage. Now, I think there have been some studies into that might have cast doubt on the effectiveness of that rule change, and the government has switched back, and we haven't necessarily seen the same stresses and strain despite all the problems that we've been talking about with the capacity. So I suppose some would question as to how impactful that might be.
Of course, but that's still an option, because you have this capacity who's available in Europe. It's available. We must not forget, the Moroccan trade with Europe is really, really now important, and is likely still to grow. When you hear that, I can't remember the name of this Chinese manufacturer, a battery manufacturer, just invested in northern Morocco and will build a battery factory, which is just humongous factory. The economy in Morocco is very, very dynamic, and it's an option. Let's look at it.
Well, in these times when there's a lot of talk of geopolitical problems and protectionism, perhaps it is quite optimistic to be thinking about more trade rather than less trade. And maybe that's a good place to end, Alain.
That's our philosophy, right? So we need to think positively, despite everything we've been discussing over the last hour. We need to think positively and see how we can foresee the light at the end of the tunnel. As we've showed over the last 20 years, not only at Efret, I would say the industry at large, it's a very, very resilient industry. A lot of things being thrown at us, and we're still here.
Thank you very much for coming on the show, Alain. It's been a pleasure, and hope to catch you again sometime later, or perhaps next year.
Well, for sure, Greg. Anytime. It's really, really always a pleasure. And I would dare say we're not doing that enough.
Thanks for listening or watching. Follow our socials to catch every episode.